During World War II, I had the misfortune of being on a freighter that was temporarily stranded in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Our engine broke down about 7 days out of port, and even though we were part of a convoy headed for Italy, the demands for materials made by the war forced the rest of the ships to leave us behind, while they went on ahead. From 1942 to 1943, the waters of the Atlantic were thick with Nazi submarines, and they all had commanders eager to sink ships that might be helping the Allied forces. We were all tense and nervous, expecting to see 2 or 3 of those terrible metal fish streaking towards our helpless vessel at any time. By the 3rd day of bobbing in the water like a sitting duck during hunting season, the crew had become really jumpy and tense. We had a few guns on deck, but we all knew that they would be of little use against a submarine unless they surfaced, and it was hardly likely that a commander would waste the time and effort to surface in order to engage us in an old-fashioned sea battle. Launching a couple of torpedoes at our ship from the safety of Neptune's domain would better do the trick. In late afternoon of the 3rd day, I was on my bunk, trying to get some rest before my next watch. I was completely alone in the quarters, and I was awakened by the sensation of a warm hand nudging my shoulder. I grunted and tried to shrug off the annoyance that was interfering with my sleep, but something seemed very familiar about this nudging. I opened my eyes and saw the image of my mother standing next to my bunk. She was still pushing at my shoulder, and when my eyes widened in astonishment at her presence, she smiled at me. "Vic, honey," she told me in her usual soft, pleasant voice, "you'd better get up now. It's time to get up." Before I could respond in any manner whatsoever, the form of my mother disappeared. My mother had been dead for 8 years, and for a minute or so I thought that maybe I'd been dreaming, perhaps reliving a day in my childhood when my mother had woken me up so that I could get ready to go to school. But the more I thought about the apparition, the more I began to feel so damn uneasy that I started to get dressed and got out of my bunk room as quickly as I could. Since I didn't wish to be alone after that strange experience, and I still had a couple of hours before I was due to report to my watch, I decided to go down to the engine room and talk with the engineers who were working on the repairs. I had no more than nodded hello at one of the firemen, who was a good buddy of mine, when a tremendous explosion shook the entire freighter and knocked us all off kilter. I went down on one knee, and a couple of the men fell flat on their backsides. No one had to tell us that we had just been hit by one of the Germans' torpedoes. Within a matter of minutes, all of the crew members had crowded into lifeboats and were rowing away from the sinking ship. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but as I looked back at the slowly sinking freighter, I clearly saw that there could have been a fatality if the ghost of my mother had not awakened me when she did. From my position on the lifeboat, I could see that a massive hole had been blasted in the starboard side of the ship. I had been sleeping directly above the spot of impact only moments before the torpedo had struck. My mother had somehow managed to go on recess from heaven so that she would be able to wake me up just in time. In October 1965, the Air Force airfield at Tan Son Nhut had enough to keep it busy with Viet Cong raids and airstrikes without having to worry about restless spirits. But a pesky phantom Frenchman had this nasty habit of setting off flares and keeping all of us on edge. I was an air policeman, and I was making my customary watch one night. I was out near the bomb and ammunition dump when someone triggered off one of the flares. The captain in charge of our detail immediately began to fire in the direction of that flare, thinking that he saw someone in black pajamas drop into a ditch. But when our men got there, the ditch was empty. The next thing we knew, another flare went off, and there seemed to be someone up in a tree just beyond the old French tower. Our captain again opened up, and so did the rest of our guys, but not one person fell from the tree. We all glanced uneasily at each other on the moonlit flooded runway. What had caused those flares to go off? The adrenaline was flowing in our veins, and our nerves could not be quieted. Some veteran Vietnamese guards explained to us that the ghost was that of a French captain who was on duty in the tower when his outpost was overrun by Viet Minh on the last day of the war waged against the French in 1954. The Frenchman had put up a fierce, though vain, struggle. When he was finally captured, the communists decided to repay him for the trouble he had caused them by beheading him. The French captain had pled with his captors to be shot like a soldier instead of beheaded like a criminal, but the communists had made up their minds. He was clad in black pajamas and then decapitated. The Vietnamese soldiers that we worked with believed that the Frenchman's body was buried in an old Buddhist cemetery out by the airport gates, but his head was hidden somewhere near the old watchtower. The story went that the Frenchman, now a member of the Unquiet Dead, would make regular forays to the old tower in search of his head if he was ever to find any rest. This was only the first time of many spectral visits from this phantom Frenchman that I experienced. Our soldiers became accustomed to the visits, and they learned to disregard the pajama-clad figure hovering around the old French tower at the edge of the main runway. Flares continued to be set off mysteriously, however. The Vietnamese soldiers were firm in their beliefs regarding this nocturnal specter. They always avoided night watch on the edge of the runway, and they repeatedly refused to allow the old tower to be torn down. When the runways were extended to accommodate fighter jets, all the other towers were removed, but not the one where the Frenchman continued to seek for his head. Back in the early 60s, my father, who was a Philippine Air Force officer, was posted in Saigon as a military attaché, so we lived in then South Vietnam for 3 to 4 years during the early part of the Vietnam War. For reasons unknown to me, we moved houses 3 times, and the second house we lived in was huge and very old, more like a mini mansion, obviously French architecture. We actually rented just the bottom part of the house while the owner, an ethnic Chinese-Vietnamese widow and her 2 daughters, lived upstairs. I remembered my sis and I used to go upstairs for tutoring by one of her daughters about basic French as we attended a French school called Colette, and later on another school called Jardin des Enfants, which is on the same street as the Philippine Embassy. We also attended American school our last year in Vietnam. The house was situated beside a cemetery, and what seemed to me that was so odd even at that time, there was a gate near the back part of the yard which opened to the cemetery. The layout of our house looked strange, too. There was this huge lounge room, big enough for a dance floor space, and a short hallway to my parents' bedroom and bathroom, and then there was this other large dining entertainment area in between, which separated our parents' bedroom and our bedrooms in the kitchen. My brother had his own bedroom, and me and my 2 sisters, at that time we were 7, 8, and 10, all slept in one king-size bed together. Our bedroom didn't have a door, but my brother's room had one, and we could see his door from our bedroom. From what I can recall as a 7-year-old, I was wakened by our bedroom window shuddering as it was a stormy night, and the wind was howling through the entire window. It was quite spooky, and I couldn't go back to sleep. Somehow I felt something was going to happen. And it did. I saw a headless figure of what appeared to be in a long black coat floating from our bedroom to my brother's room, and then it disappeared. I saw part of a skeleton appear which looked luminous peering through the crack of the door hinge of my brother's bedroom door. And his bedroom door was always left slightly ajar, and I just sat there paralyzed while I was witnessing these apparitions. I tried to wake up my sisters to tell them what I had just seen, but they were out and they didn't seem interested. I couldn't go back to sleep as I was too scared that the ghosts might come near me. The following morning, I told the family what I had seen during the night, and to my relief, they believed me. My sisters also said that they were aware that I was trying to wake them up to tell them what I had seen, but they were too scared, so they pretended they were asleep. From that date on, I assure you, I believe in ghosts and spirits. I was posted in Fob Anaconda during my deployment in Iraq. I was one of 24 soldiers who manned one of 4 entrances into our base. We covered the north entrance, where locals would enter and go through our security scanner. They'd be checked for illegal substances and be routinely verified by our canine division. We came across 80 locals who worked in our base on a daily basis, half of who presented goods in our flea markets for sale at the bazaar, and the other half who worked for our construction yard doing manual labor and earning American dollars, since Iraq's economy was ran by our dollar currency. During my deployment, I had grown fond of many of the Iraq locals and began to grow interest in their culture and respected them as equals because, hey, I'm not closed-minded or racist. During the end of my tour, I noticed that many of the workers had perished because Al-Qaeda spies would denounce their family and then murder them while they had exited our base for aiding us and taking American money as a form of payment. We had a strict procedure of allowing locals inside the base. Each person was assigned a military ID card which had their picture, date of birth, and microchip attached to the card. After they were scanned into our system, they had to go through an X-ray machine to see if they were smuggling any items inside the base. During my last 2 weeks, something insane happened that was recorded on our reports that raised the eyebrows across our company. It was the ghost story of the year. One of the older locals that I generally talked to on a daily basis came in through the X-ray machine, but was acting very odd and looked pale. His name was Hazim, and for the first time in months, he didn't speak to me or acknowledge me. He just looked sad and uncomfortable, so I left him alone. I assumed it was a death in the family or something terrible that had happened to him. So again, I left him alone, and as he turned in his badge to enter the base, we did a recount on the badge IDs to make sure all of the locals were accounted for, and that the badges matched the correct number of people. By the end of the day, the same crowd shuffled through the X-ray machines and picked up their IDs and made their way back home to their own villages. I noticed that Hazim's badge was still hanging on our wall, and he was still active in our base according to our system. I quickly called construction yard, alerting them that we had a local that may have been left behind in the latrines or possibly had wandered off into the working area. They double-checked their cameras and said that all of the individuals signed in had been signed out and that their records were spot on. Our platoon sergeant was worried that we might have allowed him inside the confines of the base without checking him through the system, and we did a thorough manhunt for him. But nothing came up. The base was put on alert, and the interpreters were notified of the situation, asking for every individual they could to help locate Hazim. That morning we checked in all the normal locals who were working and noticed that Hazim did not return. So we marked him MIA in our records, and later that afternoon, his wife and son came up to our control point with a cart. She was explaining to the interpreter what had happened, and the interpreter was pale and sweating as if he had seen a ghost. He reluctantly turned to me and attempted to collect himself. Hazim had been killed the day before by an insurgent because he was working for the U.S. He was shot to death around 7 a.m., and during that time frame, his family was held hostage as they were being questioned by the terrorists as to who else he had been working with and who else had been working with him. Hazim had been wrapped up inside the cart, his body cleaned, and was ready to be buried, and we had the mortuary affairs come to identify the body. Still crying and mourning, his wife handed me his badge that was stained with his blood. I just said, "This is impossible," as I knew we had already had that badge inside the office. I was confused, but to prove myself that a duplicate must have been made, I ran inside, but to my astonishment, there was no badge on the wall. I checked the computers. There was also no log of him entering the base on file, and I was extremely pissed and thought that someone was playing a joke on me. I told the interpreter that we all saw him enter the base and that he gave us his ID, and he replied that it wasn't possible since he had been dead since the morning of that day. Puzzled and confused, I demanded to check the video recordings of the previous day to counter-argue that we were right. The video recording captured Hazim entering the building and scanning through the X-ray captured on video, and as he got off the X-ray machine, he vanished as he started to remove his badge. We watched it over and over again in disbelief, because that is physical evidence that he was there and everyone saw him. His wife watched the video and continued to cry as she acknowledged his appearance in the video. Our company commander had us destroy the video as it was in bad taste, and anything like that leaking out onto YouTube would face UCMJ charges for uploading confidential footage. Hazim was buried the same day with all of his relatives at his village. One of his coworkers came up to me and explained that Hazim had been secretly putting aside money and was hiding it somewhere in the base and had kept it away from the Taliban, preventing them from robbing him, and he had instructed his friend to give the funds to his family upon the possibility of his death. His coworker explained to me, even at his death, his loyalty to his family was bound by his soul and his love to ensure that they were taken care of. In a span of just 1 year, Hazim had saved $8,000, which was more than enough for his family to live off for the next 10 years. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories, a special salute to our military. I know it's a little after Veterans Day, but this new baby has kept me hopping and I don't have as much time as I used to. If you are an active duty soldier or a veteran, thank you for your service. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and of course you can follow me on all of my social media outlets. Links to that are in the description below. If you're interested in supporting this channel, please also consider becoming a Patreon of this page. A link for that is also in the description below. If you have a true scary story you would like me to share, please send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Working on the next volume, and hopefully that'll be out soon, but again guys, holy cow, having a baby is really crazy, as many of you have already mentioned. I'm really tired. Hope all is well with you. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.